Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the October meeting of the Pittsfield Green Drinks. We meet the third Tuesday of every month. This time we're virtual, as we have been for the last, oh my goodness, since April. So we are the Berkshire Environmental Action Team. We protect the environment for wildlife to support the natural world that sustains us all. We have three main program areas: watchdogging, education and outreach, and stewardship. And you can find out about everything that we're doing along with our community members on our community calendar. You can learn a lot about us from our newsletter, which you can find by going to Current Weekly Newsletter. And we invite everyone to submit events related to the environment, even vaguely related to the environment. You can post or find a job. You can check out the State Environmental Monitor. And you can look at public notices for Berkshire, Hampden, and Hampshire and Franklin counties. So tonight we are here with Mattie Vandiver and Sadie Curtis, and I am so tickled pink, as my mother would say, to be welcoming these two young women. They are my students at the Berkshire Waldorf High School. We studied botany together last spring, virtually, which was quite a whirlwind, and I was so incredibly impressed with the work that they did, the research papers that they wrote, that I thought maybe you all would like to hear what they have done as well. So Mattie and Sadie, take it away.
Hi everyone. Let's share my screen. All right, so we're going to introduce ourselves as well. So this is my friend Sadie Curtis, and she loves to stargaze on her roof, play electric guitar songs, and compose piano compositions that are meant to be played on electric guitar for piano. And if she was a flower, she'd be a nasturtium.
Thanks, Mattie. Okay, and this is Mattie Vandiver, and she writes amazing poems about the natural world and human connection to nature and all sorts of other great things. And she's an amazing singer, and if she were a flower, she would be an echinacea. Okay, so now we're going to talk about plant communication. But first, let's start off somewhere that we all know, the woods. The woods is one of my favorite places. I walk in and it's on a hot summer day, it's like it's so much colder in the woods, like a cool breeze. And I love looking up, and all around me I see the golden and green light that's filtering through the leaves, and it's just so beautiful. And it's one of my favorite places to be. And we all know everything that we see in the woods, and there are lots of things that we see, but there's also a lot going on that we don't see. And so underneath our feet is a network of mushrooms called the mycorrhizal fungal network. And this is a big part of how plants communicate. Mattie's going to get a little more in detail about that later, but first I just wanted to start off by talking about what is the mycorrhizal fungal network. So mycorrhizal fungi are made of mycelia, the material that mushrooms are made out of. It's kind of white and stringy. Mattie, if you want to share that slide. It looks something like this. And it grows everywhere underground, especially near the roots of trees, especially the biggest trees, and all sorts of plants. And it connects between them. It forms pathways between plants. So mycelia are underground, and the part that we do see, mushrooms, are actually the sex organs of fungi. And I'm not going to get into mushroom reproduction today because that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, I think that's pretty cool. So there are a couple types of mycorrhizal fungi. The one that we have here in New England is called ectomycorrhizal fungi, and it looks something like what you're seeing on the slide right here. If you dug up around the roots of a tree, which I don't recommend, that's what you would see. And yeah, so that's there. In the tropics, they have endomycorrhizal fungi, which are more round and spore-shaped, and they're faster at giving the trees nutrients, which allows the trees to grow quickly like they do in the tropics. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mattie so she can talk about what the mycorrhizal fungal network does exactly.
Okay, so The mycorrhizal fungi network, they communicate through it. Plants can warn each other of droughts, insect invasions, diseases, and then the plants on the receiving end are able to bump up their defenses and protect themselves before the threat even reaches them. So within 24 hours of an aphid attack, plants can warn each other of that attack. With the droughts, they can signal to other plants that they should close their stomata so that they can conserve water. And when a plant is cut down or injured, it releases electrical pulses similar to those that animals release in their tissue when they're injured. Other than communication, they can also send minerals as well as carbon and sugars through the mycorrhizal network. And these sugars and carbon they obtain through photosynthesis. And they also need nutrients. So they obtain some of those nutrients and minerals through the water they get in through their roots, but they also need more. So through the mycorrhizal network, the fungi are able to give nutrients to the plants and trees. They do this by harvesting the nutrients and minerals. So through rocks, they can release an acid which builds tunnels through those rocks and collect minerals through them. These insects on the screen are called springtails, and the fungi can build tunnels through them while they're still alive and harvest nitrogen from them.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. Wow.
So, and then once the fungi has given the tree minerals, the fungi reaches up to the tree. The tree then softens its roots and its cell walls and allows the fungi and mycelium to wrap around and penetrate the root system. The fungi can give the tree calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, copper, and potassium. Around 25% of the fungi's nitrogen ends up in the trees. So you're probably wondering, why would the fungi help out the trees so much? Well, it's a symbiotic relationship. So the fungi help the trees by giving them minerals and nutrients, and the trees help the fungi because fungi are heterotrophic. So they're unable to photosynthesize. They can't make their own food. So in exchange for the minerals, plants give the fungi carbohydrates, which they then turn into energy. And the mycorrhizal fungi, they usually take around 30% of the tree's sugars that it makes from photosynthesis. So yeah, now Sadie's going to talk about how the mycorrhizal network was discovered.
Yeah, so we've known that mycorrhizae have been underground for a little while. I'm not sure, to be honest, when exactly they were discovered, but I know that we didn't know plants could communicate through the mycorrhizal fungal network until fairly recently, in 1997, when Suzanne Simard from the University of Vancouver did this experiment. And what she did was she took this, I think it was like you guys can look on the screen, but it was a metal pipe casing, and she put it in the ground, and inside those walls she planted, I believe it was a birch seedling, a Douglas fir, and a red cedar. She planted them all there, and she covered the tops of them with plastic bags. So the plastic bags and the metal piping tube situation were used to control the experiment and make sure no external compounds could get in. So it was this very controlled environment. And what she did was she injected the soil next to, I think it was the birch and the Douglas fir, with two different carbon isotopes, unstable ones. So they were different ones so that they could be identified separately with a Geiger counter based on their rate of decay, which is a really cool way to identify that. And she injected the soils and left them there for about an hour. And when she checked, sure enough, she found in the leaves of all of the trees both carbon isotopes, proving that the trees shared the nutrients of carbon through the mycorrhizal fungal network. And at first, people didn't believe her. They were like, what? That's impossible. They just didn't want to hear about it and discredited her. But as time went on, more experiments were done. People replicated her experiment and found out that, wow, trees actually communicate and send nutrients underground. Yeah. And so this isn't just happening in Simard's little controlled experiment. It's happening all the time in all the forests with all the trees. And, sorry, switching the slide here. So this is a map of a forest. I believe it's a Douglas fir forest, or the trees that are shown are mostly Douglas firs. And each circle represents a tree. The darker and the larger the circle, the older the tree. And the black lines represent mycorrhizal pathways. And so you can see that the trees with the oldest trees are the ones with the most pathways. And so they are giving their nutrients to the younger trees to help them survive. And I think that's so cool that the older trees, they have this relationship with the younger ones and they care about them and they're trying to get the next generation of their species to survive. Yeah, so Mattie's going to talk a little bit more about Douglas firs in particular, which have something special going on.
So I recently read this book called The Overstory by Richard Powers, and one thing that really stuck out to me in it is when he calls the Douglas firs giving trees. He does this because when the firs get close to dying, or they know they're going to die soon, they dump all of their carbon and nutrients into the mycorrhizal network, and then that goes to its neighboring trees. So it's like a final parting gift from the Douglas fir. Often the Douglas firs will specifically send their carbon and nutrients to ponderosa pines because they're better at withstanding climate change. Some scientists think that Douglas firs might even be replaced by the ponderosa pines as our earth continues to warm. Sometimes trees will even dump like excess carbon and nutrients into the mycorrhizal network as a kind of a bank. So once they dump that into the bank, then maybe they need it later and they can retrieve it. So that's kind of cool. So yeah, there are other ways of communication besides just the mycorrhizal network. So plants can also use things called VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, and these are pheromones or other scents that the plant excretes. They were first theorized by Jack Schultz and Ian Baldwin in the 1980s. And at first, like Suzanne Simard's experiments, they weren't believed. But then now over 20 VOCs have been identified. And then some of them are shown on the screen here. For example, when a lodgepole pine is attacked, it'll send a monoterpene volatile signal to the other pines to warn them that this is coming. Elms and pines, when they're eaten by a certain type of caterpillar, the trees detect the caterpillar's saliva and excrete a pheromone that attracts parasitic wasps, and then those wasps come and they lay eggs in the caterpillars. So then the caterpillars die. When acacia leaves are eaten, they can send ethylene gas and warn the other acacia trees of that threat. And then the nearby acacia trees pump tannins into their leaves, which is a chemical that will make the herbivores sick if they eat them. So then definitely don't eat them. There's also another form of communication called calcium signaling, and it signals within the plant itself. So when a plant is brushed, touched by something, or damaged, or like something eats its leaves, the amount of calcium in the leaf increases where it is touched or damaged. So when a bug bites a plant, it causes a release of a glutamate, which is an amino acid, and that travels through the plant's vascular system in like less than 2 minutes. And then that whole plant is warned of the threat. Even when like we brush by a plant in the woods, we signal that calcium release. So it's shown in the diagram where, like when a plant is brushed, the calcium immediately increases in that area.
Yeah, these are some beautiful photos by our friend and classmate, Jem Taylor. He's a great photographer. Yeah, there they are. Yeah, so this whole thing, this mycorrhizal fungal network, is crazy. It sounds like something out of science fiction, like underground web of mushrooms. And actually, they used it in the newest Star Trek series. They wrote about a mushroom network in space, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, I recommend Star Trek Discovery if you get a chance to watch it. And that's actually what inspired me to find out more about the real mycorrhizal network on Earth. And so people often see trees and plants as something outside of ourselves, something other and something separate. And we even have like a separate word for it, nature, which I try to avoid using at all times because I feel like it distances myself from my surroundings. And I think maybe through learning about plant communication and all that goes on, I know it's helped me to see that plants aren't so different from us. They communicate, they share nutrients, they have conversations, maybe they just chat about whatever. Maybe they're talking about us. Who knows what's going on underground. Yeah, so thanks for listening to our presentation on plant communication.
So along with plant communication, I have a lot of other interests in nature. Specifically with botany, I really like liverworts. So I first found out about these when I was hiking with my aunt in Arkansas, and we saw them along the river, and I thought they looked so cool. They have like, here's a picture that I took in Arkansas last April. And they have like these scaly type leaves. I thought they were really cool. So then I did a bunch more research on them. Trying to change the slide here. Okay, so liverworts are non-vascular plants. They don't produce any seeds, flowers, wood, or fruit. They just have their leaves and their rhizoids. They're native to every continent. There's over 9,000 species worldwide, and they mostly grow in tropical places because, like mosses, they need a lot of moisture to survive. So they can't grow in deserts, and they don't grow in areas with salt water. There's two types of liverworts. There's the moss-like liverworts and the leafy liverworts. The moss-like liverworts are the ones that grow like along creeks. And then the leafy liverworts, you can find them more in the woods, on trees, on rocks. So they grow in the same kind of environment that mosses do. This is a botanical illustration of some liverworts that I thought was really pretty. The nomenclature of the scientific name of liverworts, which is Marchantiophyta, comes from the botanist Nicholas Merchant, and they were given the common name liverwort because there used to be a thing called the doctrine of signatures. So people thought that God made certain plants to look like organs of the body, and I guess that a lot of people thought that liverworts look like livers, I guess, like the lobes. Not sure, I think they do especially, but and so they thought that liverworts could heal diseases of the liver. Now
so would they eat them?
Well, they probably shouldn't have. So unlike a lot of plants that do have medicinal uses, there haven't been very many studies that show that liverworts can actually help with things. If they're ingested, they can cause stomach irritations, kidney and urinary tract infections, so I don't recommend eating them. Where's my notes? Okay. So a lot of people can sometimes get confused on whether liverworts are ferns or mosses, especially because liverworts are in the bryophyte category with mosses. but they aren't mosses or ferns. They're in their own separate category, Marchantia or Hepaticus. They aren't ferns because we see the sporophyte generation of the fern, but in a liverwort we see the gametophyte generation. So the sporophyte is the asexual and diploid phase of the plant. We see how in the gametophyte generation, it's the gamete producing part. So that's the part that produces the egg cells and the sperm cells and creates the zygote. Liverworts are not mosses because the rhizoids of liverworts are unicellular and the rhizoids of mosses are multicellular. And then also liverworts are completely different in their appearance and makeup. They have more like leaf-like lobes.
Yeah, I don't know why people think they're ferns. They don't look like ferns.
No, they don't. So yeah. Liverwort reproduction is so cool. So they're dioecious, meaning they have separate plants for their male and female haploid gametophytes. And those produce the egg and sperm on separate plants. But they can also reproduce asexually without sexual reproduction. So most of the plant's reproduction is asexual because it's a much easier process. Here is both the sexual and asexual reproduction of the liverwort. So I'll try to explain this. During the sexual reproduction of a liverwort, the male gametophyte produces and releases sperm, and these spores are carried by the wind to a female gametophyte and then into the egg. This sperm then fertilizes the egg, and it creates a small diploid sporophyte zygote, and that's called the seta. So that's shown to kind of the bottom right of the diagram. And that's completely dependent on the female gametophyte for survival. So it lives inside the female gametophyte, which is shown at the bottom of the diagram. And it lives inside a pocket for its whole life. The seta creates haploid spores, and they undergo meiosis. And then the seta is ruptured by the elater, which is a structure inside the seta which forces the spores out because of moisture. And then these spores go and they start new liverwort plants. So that's the sexual form of reproduction. And then the asexual reproduction is through these small, like cup-like structures on the liverwort leaves, and they're called gemma cups, which are those little cup-looking things there. And when rain or water splashes into the cups, it releases the spores, and those are able to grow into their own full gametophytes. So that's a much simpler way of reproduction than the sexual reproduction, which is why most of them reproduce asexually. And then this is the male gametophyte reproducing, and this is also, I took in Arkansas this April. And these are liverworts that I found in Litchfield, Connecticut last spring. So currently liverworts are being studied because they're very vulnerable to shifts in the environment. So scientists think that they could be used to monitor shifts in climate change because they're found all over continents, all over our country. They can easily be accessed and easily studied to learn more about climate change. So yeah, that's liverwort. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mattie and Sadie. Well done. What a delightful presentation. I think both topics are really, really wonderful. I think no one ever talks about liverworts, and I'm so glad that Mattie took an interest in them and asked to do a report on them. Linda Barry, I don't know if anyone here knows the answer to this question. Linda Barry's wondering if tree mast years are coordinated through tree communication. Does anyone know? Bruce, Jane? A topic for further discussion. Does anyone have questions for Mattie or Sadie?
I actually have a question. What is a tree mast year?
Oh, excellent question, Sadie. So a tree mast year is what we had last year with the oak trees, where there were acorns everywhere. And if you lived in a place like I did that had giant multi-hundred-year-old oak trees, it was like having casters all over your yard. And if your yard had any pitch to it whatsoever, it was like really difficult to walk to your house. We were just covered with acorns everywhere. So what happens in a mast year is that all the trees in the region produce their fruits in crazy bonkers numbers. And the thought is that all the squirrels and all the bears and all the, chipmunks couldn't possibly eat all the acorns. So this is how they ensure their survival, the next generation's survival. Yeah, and lots of, as far as I know, every kind of tree does it. And it doesn't, as far as I know, there aren't sort of predictable cycles about it, but they all seem to do it at the same time, like every single red oak and white oak. Although last year it really seemed like a red oak thing to me. Yes, Lee. Go ahead, Lee.
I gotta unmute myself first. That was excellent. I learned so much. Thank you so much. I have a question, Mattie. Do you have a population or an environment in which you're studying liverworts now?
No, I don't.
Do you want to establish a baseline? Because you've pretty much like laid out a course of study that might track climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be something convenient just to have a population that you know is close by that you could monitor easily and start the research.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, you should do that.
It's a good idea.
It'd be fun.
Yeah.
I want to do it with you.
Mattie and Sadie, Leslie says, you changed the way I look at the woods. I walk through. Thank you. Keep challenging the folks around you with your enthusiasms. And Jeff and Sandra want to know, can non-native species communicate via the mycelium? Do the other plants warn each other of invasive species?
Oh, that's interesting. Did you come across anything about invasive species in your research?
I didn't, but I feel like they would still connect with the mycelium network.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sadie.
I think that is if like plants can adapt, like invasive species can adapt enough to live in the environment, they can adapt enough to the mycelia that live here in order to communicate and share nutrients. But that's interesting. I wonder if like trees avoid sharing their nutrients with invasive species. I'll have to look into that.
So as far as I know, they can. And some invasive plants like garlic mustard are what's called allelopathic, which means that they emit toxins out of their roots and they block our native species from communicating with each other. Mm-hmm. And black walnut is a native species that is also allelopathic and emits a toxin that keeps other folks from growing around it, native and non-native. That's why you can see trees that are labeled as, or plants that are labeled as black walnut tolerant or juglans tolerant, which is the black walnut family.
Interesting. So does that mean that they don't experience the interchange of mycorrhizae? And I mean, how does the black walnut relate to the buddies around it, other than—
I don't know. Are they only takers and not givers? I'm not sure. Does anyone here know?
They are only takers and not givers, because I don't think a plant could survive without mycorrhizae. It's a really important relationship. Like the mycorrhizae even help the tree take up water around its roots by like solidifying the roots to the soil. Mm-hmm. I don't know if a tree could survive without that.
Wow. Okay.
So I see Andrea's question in the chat.
Oh, yes.
So it's the question is it every tree in an area that would connect through these networks, or only one species per network? So multiple species of trees connect through the same network.
Yeah, every tree. The trees share a network.
And other plants too.
Mm-hmm.
And Ms. Blexard, Sarah Blexard asks, is there anything mushroom foragers can learn from the mycelium? Are there any signs that foragers can perceive? I don't know very much about mycelia.
Right. I'm really not sure. I know I go out foraging with my dad a lot. We find like chicken of the woods and hen of the woods. We just made a soup last week, actually. But I'm not sure if the mycelia would tell anything about that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Bruce, you have your hand up. Bruce Wynn.
Unmute there. I left you guys just for a few minutes because I wanted to go on Google Scholar and see if I could find an answer just looking at some journal abstracts on that coordination of mast years. And it seems like it's not a settled issue, but that is high up on the list of what's suspected of coordinating it in small areas. Although the environmental signals are probably more of a trigger in the large geographic areas, but in small scale coordination, I just did a quick look at like 3 abstracts, and that seems to be where they are right now. So I just thought I'd pass that along.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Professor Bruce to the rescue. Does anyone have any final questions before we let these girls do their homework?
Well, I feel like I just want to say thank you, you two. I learned a lot too.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Really appreciate it. My name's Pamela. I don't know if you can tell I'm the one talking.
Yes, we can see you, Pamela. We can see your little box light up.
Oh, you see the box light. Okay. It's my little mycorrhizae.
Oh, and Sarah Blexard wants to know when you will present again. Actually, I should say that this presentation is being recorded and it will be shown at the virtual Berkshire Earth Expo. Date to be announced when this screening will be, but Mattie and Sadie have been invited to share their work, and I'm so beyond proud of them, and I'm so glad that they're sharing their work and their research and their love of plants with Berkshire County. So do you have any final thoughts, Mattie and Sadie?
I don't think so.
No, thank you for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
Okay, thank you,
Good.
everyone. Oh, Lee, did you have your hand up?
It was just a comment. I just wanted to say what's so interesting in both topics is about how the cooperation, I mean, the broader scope of cooperation in organisms that really allow life to evolve. And this is sort of underscoring that. It kind of follows along the same lines as Lynn Margulies's research.
I was just thinking that, yes.
And so I think that's a really fascinating paradigm for us to consider in this world.
Mm-hmm. Cooperation instead of competition, always.
Right.
Yeah, it's so interesting because trees are both cooperative and competitive. Like, if you've seen trees growing along the Housatonic River, they don't grow up, but instead they grow out sideways so they can get that like clear sunlight air that's above the river where there aren't any trees growing.
Mm-hmm.
And like trees grow taller so they can get the sunlight in the forest. That's cool that they're both.
Thank you for that wonderful final thought, Lee. What a way to leave us in this year of turmoil and division. Just think about all the cooperation your cells are even doing right now. All right, everyone, have a very good night. We'll see you on November 17th for Migratory Birds with Tom Tyning and Dick Farron. And it will be a fantastic presentation, and I hope you all will join us then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mattie and Sadie.
Thank you so much.
Everybody. And thank Beat.
Thank Bede.
Yeah, thank you, Pete.
Thanks,
Job,
Bede.
you guys.
Jane and Elizabeth and everybody else.
Thanks.
See you tomorrow morning.